They say fear is the mind killer. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like ocean tides, most species learn this lesson through careful observation and measured diplomacy. We study our enemies from afar, calculate their strengths, and engage only when victory seems certain. But humans? Humans embrace fear like an old friend, and dance with death as if it were their favorite partner. They don't just face the impossible, they laugh at it, spit in its face, and somehow, impossibly, they win. I am Zekthar of the Valorian Empire, decorated fleet commander, strategist of 1,000 victories, and witness to something that still haunts my sleep cycles 3 standard years later. This is the story of the day I learned that there are worse things in the universe than death itself, and that sometimes the most terrifying creatures in existence are the ones standing beside you, fighting for the same cause. The day humanity showed me what real monsters look like, and why the galaxy should be grateful they're on our side. The first time I met a human, I was not impressed. Commander Sarah Chen stood barely 5.5 feet tall, her dark hair pulled back in what their military called a regulation bun. Her uniform was crisp, her posture perfect, but her eyes held something I couldn't quite identify at the time. It wasn't the calculating intelligence I expected from a species that had fought their way from a single planet to controlling 17 star systems in less than 2 centuries. It wasn't the cold efficiency that marked most successful military commanders across the galaxy. Really, it was something warmer, more dangerous. It was hope. "Commander Zekthar," she said, extending her small, pale hand in the peculiar human greeting ritual. "I've heard about your victory at the Keth Nebula. Impressive tactical work." I accepted the handshake, my 4-fingered grip easily encompassing her entire hand. My skin, a deep purple with the ceremonial scarification of my rank, must have looked alien and intimidating to her. Yet she didn't flinch, didn't show the slightest hesitation that most species displayed when meeting a Valorian for the first time.
"Your species has an interesting reputation, Commander Chen," I replied, studying her through my secondary optical organs.
Humans fascinated xenobiologists across the galaxy for their unusual physiology. Only 2 eyes, positioned frontally like a predator. Yet they'd evolved from prey animals. Weak bones, fragile skin, no natural weapons to speak of, and a lifespan so brief it was almost tragic. "Your people seem to specialize in surviving situations that should have killed you." She smiled, an expression that revealed her flat, omnivore teeth. "We're too stubborn to die properly." It's a character flaw. The briefing room aboard the GSS Harmony was built to accommodate multiple species, with adjustable atmospheric controls and gravity plates that could be modified by section. Representatives from 7 different civilizations sat around the holographic display table, each in their preferred environmental bubble. The Sith delegation kept their section at 0.7 standard gravity with a humid, nitrogen-rich atmosphere. The crystalline Zenhai required precise electromagnetic field manipulation to maintain their coherent forms. The aquatic Merdun had brought portable hydro tanks. Humans needed almost nothing. Standard atmosphere, standard gravity, standard temperature ranges. They were so average it was almost insulting. Fleet Admiral Katos of the Galactic Defense Coalition called the meeting to order with a harmonic resonance that translated roughly to attention across 17 different languages. His massive insectoid form dominated the head of the table, compound eyes reflecting the blue glow of the strategic display. "The situation has deteriorated," Kurtos announced, his translated voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The Devourers have broken through the outer rim. 17 colonies have gone silent. We estimate 3 billion sentient lives lost." A collective shudder passed through the assembled commanders. The Devourers, officially designated as Species 347, X by the Coalition Science Division, were the nightmare that kept civilizations awake. They were not conquerors in any traditional sense. They didn't want territory, resources, or political submission. They consumed everything. Biological matter, technology, even the base elements of planets themselves were processed into more Devourers. "Our combined fleets have proven insufficient," Kotos continued. "Traditional tactics fail against an enemy that treats our weapons as nutrition and our shields as seasoning. We need something different." That's when Commander Chen leaned forward. "Admiral, what if I told you that sometimes the best way to fight monsters is to become something worse?" The Sith representative hissed in what I recognized as disdain. "Humans and their ridiculous philosophy. You cannot defeat a cosmic horror through wishful thinking."
"Not wishful thinking," Chen replied, her voice steady and calm.
"Tactical innovation based on species-specific advantages." She activated her personal holo projector, and the display filled with what looked like a standard human military formation. 12 ships, arranged in a pattern that seemed almost suicidally aggressive. The Terran Expeditionary Force has developed new tactics specifically for Devourer engagement. We call it the Prometheus Protocol. I studied the formation with professional interest. It violated every principle of fleet combat doctrine I'd learned in 40 years of service. The ships were positioned too close together, creating overlapping fields of fire that would be more likely to hit friendly vessels than enemy targets. Their proposed approach vector was a direct assault with minimal defensive positioning. "Commander Chen," I said carefully, "this formation appears to be designed for mutual annihilation." "Exactly." Her smile widened, and for the first time I saw something predatory in those forward-facing eyes. The key insight about the Devourers is that they're not actually invincible. They're just really, really hard to kill using conventional methods. But humans have never been particularly conventional. She highlighted different aspects of the formation. Each ship is equipped with experimental reactor cores that can be remotely detonated. The blast pattern is designed to create a cascade effect, essentially turning our entire fleet into a single, massive explosive device. A kamikaze attack. The Murden representative bubbled through their translation unit. "This is the human solution? Suicide?" "Not suicide," Chen corrected. "Sacrifice." "There's a difference." Admiral Kurtos leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the table. "Explain this difference, Commander." "Suicide is ending your life because you can't see another option. Sacrifice is ending your life because you can see the consequences of not acting." Chen's voice never wavered, never showed doubt. The Devourers are heading for the core worlds. Trillions of lives hang in the balance. 12 human ships and their crews are a small price to pay for that kind of preservation. The room fell silent. Every species represented at this table had strong cultural prohibitions against needless death. The concept of deliberately sacrificing military assets seemed not just wasteful but morally reprehensible to most galactic civilizations. "However," Chen continued, "we're not asking anyone else to participate in this mission. This is a human operation using human ships and human crews who have volunteered knowing full well what they're signing up for." "You cannot be serious," I found myself saying. "Your species would volunteer for certain death?" "Commander Zekthar, my species volunteered to climb down from trees and walk across open savannas filled with predators that could tear us apart without effort. We volunteered to cross oceans in wooden boats without knowing what was on the other side. We volunteered to strap ourselves to controlled explosions and shoot ourselves into space." Her eyes met mine directly, and I finally recognized what I'd been seeing there. "Volunteering for impossible things is what humans do. It's why we're here." Admiral Katosis studied the tactical display for long moments. "This Prometheus protocol, it requires precise coordination?" "Extremely precise. Split-second timing across multiple vectors. And it only works if the Devourers take the bait." "What bait?" Chen's expression grew almost embarrassingly proud. "Us. Humans are apparently quite tasty to them. High protein content, complex neural networks, lots of interesting genetic material. When they detect human ships, they prioritize them as targets." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're using your own species as bait." "We're using our own species as weapons," she corrected. "The bait is just bonus." The Zen High representative chimed in crystalline harmonics that translated to skepticism. "This plan requires the human fleet to survive long enough to reach detonation position. The Devourers will attempt to consume your ships the moment they detect you, which is why we need escort support," Chen said, looking directly at me. "Fast, experienced fighters who can keep us alive just long enough to do our job." They needed my squadron. The Valorian Star Hunters were renowned throughout the galaxy for our hit-and-run tactics. We could provide the defensive screen their suicide mission required. "Commander Chen, I must ask, have any of your crew members expressed doubts about this mission?" She was quiet for a moment, and I thought I might have finally found the crack in her impossible confidence. Then she smiled again, and that smile was somehow worse than her earlier expressions of grim determination. "Commander Zekthar, yesterday I called for volunteers for a mission where survival was not just unlikely, but specifically prohibited by the mission parameters. I had space for 96 crew members across 12 ships." She paused, letting the weight of numbers settle over the room. "I received over 4,000 applications. The silence that followed was profound. The hardest part wasn't finding humans willing to die for this mission," Chen continued. "It was choosing which ones got to." Admiral Katos made a decision with the swift efficiency that had made him legendary. The Coalition approves the Prometheus Protocol. Commander Zekthar, your squadron will provide escort duties. All other fleet assets will maintain perimeter positions and attempt to contain any devourers that survive the detonation. As the meeting dissolved into tactical planning sessions, I found myself studying Commander Chen with new interest. Her casual discussion of mass suicide, no sacrifice, should have been disturbing. Instead, I was beginning to understand why the devourers prioritized human targets. They recognized something in humanity that the rest of us had missed. Humans weren't dangerous because they were strong, fast, or well-armed. They were dangerous because they were willing to do things that no sane species would even consider. 3 days later, I stood on the bridge of my flagship, the Valorian's Edge, watching the human fleet arrange itself in their impossible formation. 12 ships, each one carrying 8 crew members who had volunteered to die today. Commander Zekthar, came Chen's voice over the communications array. My tactical officer would like to know if your people have any traditional battlefield prayers.
We do,
I replied. Would you like to hear it?
please.
I spoke the ancient words in my native tongue, then translated, May the stars remember our courage, and may our enemies remember our strength. That's beautiful, Chen said. Would you like to hear ours? Before I could respond, every human ship in the formation began broadcasting on all frequencies. 96 voices speaking in unison. We go into the dark so others can see the dawn. We face the impossible so others never have to. We're the line that will not be crossed. It wasn't a prayer. It was a promise. And as the Devourer fleet began to emerge from hyperspace, a writhing mass of organic metal and hungry darkness that defied every law of physics I understood, I realized that humanity had just made a promise to the entire galaxy. The question was whether the universe was ready for them to keep it. The Devourers emerged from hyperspace like a wound in reality itself. I had seen them before through long-range reconnaissance footage, but witnessing their arrival in person was an entirely different experience. They didn't transition from hyperspace so much as reality, simply bent around them. Space twisted, light refracted at impossible angles, and for a moment that felt like eternity. The fundamental laws of physics seemed negotiable. By the void, whispered my tactical officer, Gentile, her usually steady voice cracking with something between awe and terror. How many? I counted, though the task was almost meaningless. Devourers didn't maintain discrete forms in any sense that conventional sensors could properly track. They were biomechanical amalgamations that could split, merge, and reconfigure at will. What appeared to be a single massive ship might suddenly become dozens of smaller attack vessels, or dozens could flow together into something the size of a small moon. Minimum 300 individual units, I reported to the fleet command frequency. Maximum unknowable. Through the tactical display, I watched the human formation hold steady, 12 small ships against a force that had consumed entire star systems. The mathematics were absurd, the optics were suicidal, and yet something in their perfect formation suggested they knew exactly what they were doing. Commander Chen, I transmitted on the direct channel. Enemy fleet is significantly larger than intelligence estimates. Do you wish to abort? Her response came back immediately, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Commander Zekthar, if we only fought battles we were guaranteed to win, humanity would still be hiding in caves on Earth. The Devourers began their approach, and I got my first real look at their hunting behavior. They moved like a school of predatory fish, flowing through space in patterns that seemed random until you realized they were systematically cutting off every possible escape route. They had done this before, many times. This was practiced, efficient extermination. All escort units engage pattern Alpha 7. I commanded my squadron. Primary objective is to keep those human ships intact until they reach the detonation zone. My 12 fighters spread into a defensive screen around the human formation. Valorian Star Hunters were built for speed and maneuverability, sleek, crystalline vessels that could dance through weapons fire that would shred heavier ships. We were the elite of the elite, pilots who had trained for decades to achieve split-second reaction times and perfect spatial awareness. The first wave of Devourers hit us like a tsunami of living metal. I had fought the Keth Empire, survived the siege of Proxima, and led successful campaigns against the robot uprising in the Omega Sector. I thought I understood combat, but fighting the Devourers was like trying to have a sword duel with cancer. They didn't follow rules, didn't maintain formations, and didn't seem to care about concepts like tactics or strategy. They simply consumed everything in their path. Evasive maneuvers, I shouted, as a cluster of Devourers, each one the size of a battleship, suddenly split apart like opening flowers, revealing rows of what I could only describe as teeth. Not metaphorical teeth. Actual, biological teeth the size of shuttlecraft, embedded in mechanical jaws that opened wide enough to swallow my fighter whole. I rolled my ship through a spiraling dive that should have been impossible at our current velocity, feeling the inertial dampeners strain against physics itself. Behind me, those massive jaws snapped shut on empty space, but I could feel the gravitational distortions from their bite resonating through my ship's hull. "Contact! Contact!" came the voice of Pilot Mordek over the squadron frequency. "They're trying to grab me." I spun my ship around to see one of the Devourers had extruded what looked like metallic tentacles, each one moving with disturbing organic fluidity. They were reaching for Mordek's fighter with obvious intelligence, trying to trap rather than destroy. They want to capture us, I realized with growing horror. They don't just consume ships, they want the pilots alive. That's when Commander Chen's voice cut through the chaos on the command frequency. "All units, be advised. Devourers prefer living neural tissue over mechanical systems. They're trying to harvest your brains, not just your ships." "That's remarkably unhelpful information right now," I snapped back, while simultaneously firing a full spread of plasma charges at the tentacles reaching for Mordek. The weapon struck the Devourer's appendages and simply absorbed. The energy was consumed, processed, and I could swear the creature grew slightly larger. "Actually, Commander, it's very helpful," Chen replied with that infuriating human calm. "It means they'll prioritize my ships over yours. Watch." As if responding to her words, the entire Devourer formation suddenly shifted. The creatures that had been attacking my squadron broke off their assaults and began streaming toward the human fleet with single-minded intensity. I watched in fascination and growing dread as the Devourers transformed their approach. Where they had been fighting us with what seemed like casual indifference, they now moved with predatory focus. They flowed through space like liquid mercury, reshaping themselves into forms optimized for capture rather than destruction. The human ships held formation. "Chen, they're coming straight for you," I transmitted urgently. "All available escort units converge on the human fleet." "Negative, Commander. Maintain your current positions." I stared at my tactical display in disbelief. "You're ordering me to abandon you?" "I'm ordering you to trust us." The Devourers reached the human formation like a breaking wave. I watched in horror as tentacles of living metal reached out to envelop the small human vessels. This was it. The moment their suicidal plan fell apart against the reality of an enemy that had consumed civilizations. That's when humanity showed me what they had really volunteered for. "All ships," came Chen's voice, steady as bedrock. "Prometheus Protocol is now active. Phase 1, engagement." The human ships didn't try to evade the Devourer tentacles. Instead, they flew directly into them. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The humans were deliberately allowing themselves to be captured, flying their ships straight into the waiting maws of creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. "Chen, what are you doing?" I shouted over the communications array. "Something that only works if you're too stupid to be afraid," she replied. And then, just before the first Devourer completely enveloped her ship, Phase 2, digestion. The human vessels disappeared inside the Devourers, swallowed whole by creatures the size of small asteroids. For a moment, the battlefield felt eerily quiet. Even the other Devourers seemed to pause, as if waiting to see what their successful companions would do with their prizes. Then something extraordinary happened. The Devourers began to change. Their smooth, flowing movements became erratic. The creatures that had consumed human ships started writhing, convulsing, as if they were experiencing some kind of internal distress. "Commander Zekthar," came Chen's voice, now transmitted from inside one of the Devourers. Her signal was weak but clear. "Are you familiar with the human digestive process?" "This is hardly the time for biology lessons," I replied, though I was beginning to suspect that perhaps it was exactly the time. "Human stomachs produce hydrochloric acid," Chen continued, her voice maddeningly educational despite her circumstances. "It's designed to break down complex proteins and kill harmful microorganisms. Turns out, when you concentrate it and pressurize it properly, it's quite effective against Devourer biometal." One of the writhing Devourers suddenly split open like a cracked egg, and a human ship emerged from inside it like some impossible birth. The ship's hull was scorched and partially melted, but it was intact, functional, and now positioned inside the enemy formation. "Phase 3, Chen announced. Indigestion." The human ship that had just escaped its captor began firing, but not at the Devourers around it. Instead, It was targeting the other captured human vessels, using precisely calibrated energy beams to cut them free from their captors' digestive systems. One by one, 11 more human ships carved their way out of the creatures that had swallowed them. The Devourers, adapted to consume and process external threats, had no defense against enemies that had willingly allowed themselves to be eaten only to attack from within. Impossible, breathed my tactical officer. Not impossible, I corrected, watching the tactical display with something approaching religious awe. Just human. The freed human ships regrouped in the center of the Devourer formation, now positioned exactly where they needed to be for their original plan. They were inside the enemy's defensive perimeter, surrounded by creatures that were now writhing in apparent agony from the acidic damage to their internal systems. All units, Chen announced. Final phase, Prometheus protocol activation in 30 seconds. That's when I understood. The acid attack hadn't been their real weapon. It had been their delivery system. They had needed to get inside the Devourer formation, past all their defenses, right to the heart of the enemy fleet. Commander Chen, I transmitted urgently. You can escape now. Your ships are free. You can withdraw and... Negative, Commander. Her voice was gentle, almost regretful. This was always a one-way mission. We came here to do a job. I watched the countdown timer on my tactical display. 20 seconds. The human ships were arranging themselves in a precise geometric pattern, each one positioned to maximize the effect of their simultaneous detonation.
15 seconds.
The Devourers were beginning to recover from their acid burns, their biometal adapting and healing. In another minute, they would be fully functional again. 10 seconds. I realized that in the entire battle, not one human voice had expressed doubt, fear, or regret. They had volunteered to die today, and they were going through with it as calmly as if they were following a training exercise. 5 seconds. Commander Zekthar, came Chen's voice one final time. It has been an honor fighting beside the Valorian Star Hunters. 3, 2. The honor, I replied, has been entirely ours. 1. The detonation was visible from 3 star systems away. When the light faded and my senses came back online, there was nothing left where the Devourer fleet had been. Not debris, not energy signatures, not even empty space in any conventional sense. The human ships had somehow created an explosion that didn't just destroy matter, it unmade it, reducing everything in a sphere 50 kilometers wide to constituent atoms. The silence on all frequencies was profound. Then, gradually, reports began coming in from the perimeter fleet. Sector 7, clear. Sector 12, clear. All scanning frequencies show negative contact.
The Devourer threat to the core worlds had been eliminated.
12 human ships and 96 volunteers had accomplished what the combined military might of 7 civilizations had failed to achieve. As my squadron regrouped and began the journey back to base, I found myself thinking about Commander Chen's final words. She had said it was an honor to fight beside us, but she had it backwards. We had been privileged to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. We had watched an entire species choose to embrace death rather than accept defeat, and somehow, impossibly, they had won. 3 standard months after the Battle of the Void Gate, I stood in the memorial gardens aboard Starbase Omega, staring at a wall that shouldn't have existed. The Galactic Council had commissioned it as a tribute to the 96 humans who had died in the Prometheus Protocol, that they had made a fundamental error in their conception. They had designed it as a traditional war memorial, elegant crystalline structures etched with names, dates of service, and conventional military honors, the sort of monument that honored soldiers who had died bravely in battle. But the humans who had sacrificed themselves that day weren't soldiers who had died. They were weapons that had chosen to fire themselves at an impossible target. The distinction mattered more than the Council understood. Commander Zekthar, the voice belonged to Admiral Chen. Sarah Chen had been posthumously promoted, and her sister, Dr. Fear, Elizabeth Chen, now served as the human liaison to the Galactic Defense Coalition. I thought I might find you here. I turned to face her, noting the family resemblance immediately. The same forward-facing predator eyes, the same compact build, the same unsettling sense that she was evaluating everything around her for potential tactical applications. But where Sarah had carried herself with military precision, Elizabeth moved with the careful confidence of a scientist who had spent years studying things that could kill her. Dr. Chen. I come here often, I confess. I find myself trying to understand something that seems to defy understanding. She stepped up beside me, studying the memorial with the same intensity I had observed in her sister. What specifically puzzles you? I gestured at the crystalline wall with its neat rows of names and service records. This monument treats your sister and her crew as if they were heroes who died in service to the galaxy. But that's not what happened, is it?
Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment.
No, she said finally. That's not what happened. I was there, I witnessed it, and I still don't understand how an entire species can simply decide to embrace extinction as a tactical option. She smiled, and it was her sister's smile. Warm, dangerous, and somehow reassuring all at once. Commander, you're making a fundamental error in your analysis. My sister and her crew didn't embrace extinction. They embraced transformation. Explain. You've read the after-action reports. You know that the Prometheus protocol wasn't just about the detonation. The real weapon wasn't the explosions themselves. It was the psychological impact on every devourer in the galaxy. I had read the reports. In the months following the battle, devourer attacks had ceased almost entirely. The few encounters that had occurred showed them fleeing rather than engaging, displaying what could only be described as fear when confronted with human vessels.
The Devourers are an ancient species, Elizabeth continued.
They've consumed thousands of civilizations over millions of years. They've encountered every conceivable form of resistance, military, technological, biological, even psychological, but they had never encountered a species that would deliberately choose to become more dangerous than they were. More dangerous? Commander, think about what happened that day from a Devourer's perspective. They had perfected a hunting strategy based on the fundamental assumption that all intelligent life wants to survive. Every species they had ever encountered fought to preserve itself, which made their behavior predictable. She touched one of the crystalline nameplates, her sister's. Then they encountered humanity and discovered a species that could override its own survival instincts in service of a tactical objective. Not just override them, but do so with such systematic efficiency that 96 individuals could coordinate their own deaths down to split-second timing. That shouldn't be possible, I said. Evolution doesn't produce species that can casually disregard self-preservation. No, it doesn't, which is exactly what makes humans so terrifying to the Devourers. They've realized they're not dealing with a normal species. They're dealing with something that treats death as a tool. I studied the memorial again, seeing it with new understanding. The names on this wall, they're not really dead, are they? Biologically, yes. Functionally, Elizabeth shrugged. Every devourer in the galaxy now carries the memory of what happened here. They've incorporated the knowledge that humans exist, that we're willing to die for strategic advantage, and that we're apparently quite good at it. In a very real sense, Sarah and her crew are still fighting this war by being remembered, by being feared. I understood now why I kept returning to this memorial. It wasn't honoring the dead, it was displaying evidence of humanity's greatest weapon. Not their technology, not their tactics, but their absolute willingness to pay any price for victory. Dr. Chen, I must ask you something that has troubled me since the battle. When your sister called for volunteers, she received over 4,000 applications for a mission with zero survival probability. How is this possible? Elizabeth was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of centuries. Commander, do you know the most common cause of death for humans throughout most of our evolutionary history? Predation, I would assume?
No.
The most common cause of death was other humans killing themselves to protect their families, their tribes, their ideals. We didn't evolve from the strongest or the fastest or the most aggressive hominids. We evolved from the ones who were most willing to die for each other. She turned to face me directly, and I saw something in her eyes that made my secondary organs reflexively dilate with fear response. 4,000 humans volunteered for the Prometheus protocol because dying for others is what we do. It's not a character flaw or a species-wide mental illness. It's our defining evolutionary advantage. But surely not everyone. Commander, let me tell you about the Battle of Earth, when our homeworld was invaded by the Keth Empire. Do you know how that war ended? I knew the basics. The Keth had occupied Earth for 6 months before mysteriously withdrawing all their forces and requesting peace negotiations. Human historians were remarkably vague about the specific details. The Keth had superior technology, superior numbers, and orbital superiority. They should have won easily. Instead, they discovered that occupying a human world meant dealing with a population where every single individual was a potential suicide bomber, saboteur, or resistance fighter. She pointed to a small plaque at the base of the memorial. 3 billion humans died in that war, Commander. 3 billion. The Keth didn't withdraw because they were defeated militarily. They withdrew because they realized that the only way to truly conquer humanity was to exterminate every single human in existence, and that even attempting such a thing would cost them more than their empire could survive. I read the plaque. It was a simple inscription. The price of peace is eternal vigilance. The price of freedom is eternal willingness to pay that price. The galaxy thinks the Devourers fear us because we're unpredictable, Elizabeth continued. But that's not it. They fear us because we're perfectly predictable. We will always choose the option that maximizes damage to our enemies, regardless of cost to ourselves. Always. Without exception. I struggle for words. That's absolutely terrifying. Yes, she agreed calmly. It is. We stood in silence for several minutes, both of us contemplating the implications. Finally, I voiced the question that had been haunting me since the battle. Dr. Chen, what happens when humanity encounters a threat that can't be deterred by the prospect of mutual annihilation? Her smile was her sister's smile, but colder. Then we find out if there are worse things than extinction, and we make sure our enemies discover them first. As I left the memorial garden that day, I carried with me a new understanding of humanity's place in the galactic community. They weren't our allies because they shared our values or our goals. They were our allies because the alternative was too horrific to contemplate. The Devourers had learned this lesson the hard way. An ancient, nearly indestructible species that had consumed civilizations across the galaxy had encountered humanity and decided that some prey simply wasn't worth hunting. But I had learned something else that day, something that would stay with me for the rest of my service. The real reason the galaxy should be grateful that humanity was on our side. It wasn't because they were effective allies. It wasn't because they were powerful warriors or brilliant strategists. It was because they had shown us what we were all capable of becoming. Standing in that memorial garden, surrounded by the names of 96 individuals who had calmly chosen to transform themselves into weapons of mass destruction, I realized that every species in the galaxy now carried the same terrible knowledge. We knew it was possible to overcome the survival instinct completely. We knew that intelligent beings could choose to die with such systematic efficiency that their deaths became more powerful than their lives. And we knew that if humanity could evolve this capability, then perhaps, given the right circumstances, so could we. The Devourers had fled not just because humanity was willing to die fighting them. They had fled because humanity had shown all of us, that the concept of acceptable losses was far more flexible than anyone had previously imagined. The most terrifying predator in the galaxy was no longer the species that would kill you. It was the species that would gladly die to make sure you died first. And as I walked away from the memorial, I carried with me one final disturbing realization. Commander Sarah Chen and her 96 volunteers had won their battle not just by destroying the Devourer fleet, but by fundamentally changing what it meant to be alive in a universe where humans existed. They had taught the galaxy to be afraid of itself. And perhaps, in a universe full of monsters, that was exactly the lesson we needed to learn. The day I fought beside humanity was the day I discovered that the most dangerous creatures in existence weren't the ones who couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be deterred, couldn't be defeated. They were the ones who could choose to become unreasonable, undeterrable, and undefeatable. They were us. All of us. And now we all knew it. The day I fought beside humanity and discovered real fear. HFY, HFY Sci-Fi Stories.